What happens when the weakest species in the galaxy proves that everything the universe believed about strength was completely wrong? When a human girl from the ruins of Detroit faces down an 8-foot alien predator with military-grade enhancements and wins, using nothing but techniques her dead brother taught her in back alleys. This is the story of how one impossible fight changed the course of interstellar history forever. She was the only human in the room, and everyone expected her to fail. Talia Venn stood in formation with 47 other cadets, her shoulders squared despite the weight of 1,000 stairs. The Combat Academy of the Interplanetary Alliance stretched before her like a cathedral of chrome and pulsing energy, its walls lined with weapons from civilizations she'd only read about in classified files back on Earth. But right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was the six-armed creature pacing in front of them, his coal-black carapace gleaming under the artificial suns overhead. Commander Drak Thol was a legend, a Kavari warrior whose species had evolved from apex predators on a world where everything tried to kill you before breakfast. His 4 primary arms could move independently, while his secondary pair handled weapons or restraints. He'd trained 3 generations of Alliance officers, and his combat record was the stuff they made holovids about. Today he was looking at Talia like she was a mistake that somehow walked through the wrong door. Reflexes, Drak announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made mountains listen. Survival in real combat isn't about strength. It's about speed. It's about anticipation. It's about not dying when someone faster and stronger than you decides you should. Around her, cadets from 17 different species shifted nervously. The Kareth with their whip-like tentacles. The massive Vroxy who looked like someone had crossed a wolf with a tank. The crystalline Zephyrians whose thoughts moved at light speed. And then there was Talia, 5'6", human, supposedly the weakest link in a chain designed to break under pressure. Today we find out who among you has what it takes. Drak continued, his black eyes scanning the formation like a predator selecting prey. And who should consider a career in stellar cartography instead? A few nervous chuckles rippled through the group. Not from Talia. She'd heard variations of this speech before back on Earth from drill sergeants who thought a girl from the Detroit ruins had no business learning to fight. She'd proven them wrong then. She'd prove them wrong now. Drak's gaze landed on her, lingered just a moment too long. Cadet Venn, front and center. The formation parted as she stepped forward, boots clicking against the metal floor. Behind her, she could hear whispered conversations in languages her universal translator barely recognized. Words like fragile and liability came through crystal clear. "Tell me, human," Drak said, circling her slowly, "what makes you think you belong here?" It was a loaded question. Everyone in this room knew the politics behind her presence. Earth was the newest member of the Alliance, barely a decade past first contact. Most species still saw humans as barbarians who'd barely figured out faster than light travel. The fact that she was here at all was the result of careful diplomatic negotiations and probably a few threats. "I'm here because my brother died believing we could be better than what we were," Talia said, her voice steady. "I'm here because someone has to prove that humans don't break easy." Drak stopped in front of her, all 6 arms perfectly still. For a moment, the only sound in the vast training chamber was the distant hum of the station's generators. "We'll see about that," he said finally. Cadet Vekrin joined Cadet Venn in the center ring. The Kareth, who stepped forward, moved like liquid lightning. Vekrin was tall and graceful with 4 tentacle arms that could strike faster than most eyes could follow. His species had reflexes measured in microseconds, evolved from creatures that had to catch prey moving at hypersonic speeds through the depths of gas giant atmospheres. As they faced each other in the practice ring, Talia could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her like a physical force. This wasn't just a training exercise. This was a test of everything she represented, everything humans represented. "Standard reflex drill," Drak announced. "Cadet Vekrin will attack at quarter speed. Cadet Venn will attempt to avoid contact. Duration 60 seconds. Quarter speed. For a Kareth, that was still faster than most humans could think. But as Vekrin's tentacles began to move, flowing toward her like striking serpents, Talia felt something her instructors back home had drilled into her since she was 12 years old. Not speed, not strength, but something else entirely. Timing. The first strike whispered past her ear as she shifted her weight, a movement so small it barely looked like movement at all. The second came low, and she lifted her front foot just enough to let it pass underneath. The third, the fourth, the fifth. Each dodge was minimal, economical, like she was dancing to music only she could hear. The room went quiet. Even the whispered conversations stopped. When the timer hit 60 seconds, Vekran hadn't landed a single hit. Interesting, Drac murmured, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the academy, Talia heard something in an alien voice that sounded almost like respect. But she also heard something else in the silence that followed. Something that sounded like the beginning of a much bigger problem. Because in a room full of beings who'd been taught that humans were weak, she'd just proven that everything they thought they knew might be wrong. And some of them weren't going to like that revelation one bit. The next morning came too early and not early enough. Talia had spent the night staring at the ceiling of her quarters, replaying every second of that training session. In the darkness, she could still hear the whispers that had followed her out of the combat hall. Some curious, some respectful, but others carrying the sharp edge of resentment. She wasn't naive. She knew what her success meant to some of these cadets. If a human could outperform a Kyrith in reflexes, what did that say about the natural superiority they'd been raised to believe in? When she entered the mess hall, conversations died like someone had thrown a switch. 47 pairs of eyes tracked her movement to the food dispensers, and she could feel the weight of their attention like a physical pressure against her skull. She'd felt this before back on Earth, being the only girl in advanced combat training, being the only kid from the ruins in a program designed for military families. The only human in a room full of aliens was just the latest variation on a familiar theme. But familiarity didn't make it easier. Mind if I sit? The voice belonged to a small, delicate creature with pale blue skin and eyes like liquid starlight. Nemu was a Tellus, one of the few species whose intelligence actually scared the Alliance Council. They were telepathic, but only with emotional states, not thoughts, which meant she could feel exactly how uncomfortable Talia was right now. Please, Talia said, grateful for any company that didn't involve hostile staring. Naimu settled across from her, her movements careful and precise. You're creating quite the stir, you know. I noticed. Talia pushed synthetic protein around her plate, not really hungry. I take it that's not necessarily a good thing. Change never is at first. Nemu's voice carried wisdom that seemed too old for her apparent age. But sometimes it's necessary. Your people, they're fighters, aren't they? We're survivors, Talia corrected. There's a difference. Fighters look for conflict. Survivors do whatever it takes to see another day. And which are you? Before Talia could answer, the mess hall's atmosphere shifted again. Not the electric tension of curiosity this time, but something darker. Something that felt like a storm building on the horizon. Tharn Helek had entered the room. The Vroxy was impossible to miss. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, his wolf-like features were augmented with biomechanical implants that gleamed dully in the artificial light. His species were natural soldiers bred for war on a world where conflict was as regular as rainfall. But Tharn was different from the other Vroxy cadets. There was something personal in the way he looked at people, like he was keeping score of every slight, real or imagined. He made his way through the mess hall with deliberate slowness, accepting nods and greetings from other cadets, like a king acknowledging his subjects. But his eyes never left Talia's table. Naimu whispered, her empathic abilities apparently picking up something Talia couldn't yet feel. I don't know yet, Talia murmured back. But every instinct her brother had taught her was suddenly screaming warnings. Tharn stopped at their table, his shadow falling across Talia's meal tray like an omen. The famous humans, he said, his voice a low rumble that carried clearly in the suddenly quiet mess hall. I have to admit, I'm curious about yesterday's little performance. Just a training exercise, Talia replied, keeping her voice level. Around them, conversations had stopped entirely. This was theater now, and everyone wanted to see how it played out. Training. Tharn's laugh was like gravel in a cement mixer. Interesting choice of words. See where I come from, we have a saying. The prey that dances longest still gets eaten. Talia set down her fork and met his gaze directly. Good thing I'm not prey, then. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before explosions. Talia could feel Naimu's tension like a live wire, could see other cadets leaning forward in their seats, waiting for something to break. No, Tharn said, finally his biomechanical enhancements whirring softly as he leaned closer. I suppose we'll find out what you are soon enough. He straightened, turned to address the room. Tell me, human, what do you know about Commander Zrak's combat record? It was a trap, obviously, but Talia had learned long ago that sometimes the only way out of a trap was straight through it. I know he's never lost a formal challenge, she said. I know he's trained more Alliance officers than any instructor in Academy history. I know he earned his position through merit, not politics. Correct on all counts. Tharn's smile showed too many teeth. But what you may not know is that exactly 1 year ago, he and I had what you might call a disagreement, a formal disagreement, in front of the entire third-year class. The mess hall had gone so quiet that Talia could hear the station's life support system cycling in the distance. He won, obviously, Tharn continued, but barely, and only because I made the mistake of fighting his fight instead of my own. His eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement or might have been malice. I've had a year to think about that mistake. Talia felt pieces clicking together in her mind, forming a picture she really didn't like. And you think yesterday changes something? Yesterday proved that our esteemed commander can be surprised, that his legendary reflexes aren't quite as legendary as advertised. Tharn's voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. It makes me wonder what other assumptions we've been making about superiority around here. Cadet Jolek, Commander Zrak's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. The massive Kavari stood in the mess hall entrance, all 6 arms perfectly still, his black eyes taking in the scene with predatory calm. Commander, Tharn replied, not quite managing to hide his satisfaction at being owing at mid-provocation. I believe you have combat drills in 10 minutes. I'd hate for you to be late. It wasn't a suggestion. Tharn nodded, but before leaving, he turned back to Talia one last time. Enjoy your newfound reputation, human. But remember something my grandfather used to say, fame is just another word for target. As he walked away, Talia felt Naimu's small hand touch her arm. That, the Tellus said quietly, was not about you at all. No, Talia agreed, watching Zrak's eyes follow Tharn's exit. I don't think it was. But as she sat in the aftermath of that strange confrontation, Talia couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just been cast in a play she didn't understand with stakes higher than anyone was telling her. And the second act was about to begin. The combat simulator hummed with barely contained energy, its walls shifting from translucent to opaque as the training scenarios loaded. Talia stood in the prep area, checking her gear for the 3rd time when she felt someone watching her. Commander Zrak approached with that predatory grace that made her understand why his species had survived evolution's cruelest tests. His 6 arms moved independently as he examined readouts on a tactical display, but his primary attention was focused entirely on her. Cadet Venn, walk with me. It wasn't a request. They moved away from the other cadets toward an observation deck that overlooked the Academy's main training complex. Through the transparent aluminum, Talia could see dozens of combat scenarios playing out simultaneously. Beings from across the galaxy learning to fight together, to trust each other with their lives. Do you know why humans were admitted to the Academy? Zrak asked without preamble. Talia had heard the official story, of course. Cultural exchange, mutual understanding, building bridges between species. But something in Zrak's tone suggested those were just pretty words painted over a more complex truth. I know what the diplomatic corps said, she replied carefully. Diplomats. Zrak's secondary arms gestured dismissively. Politicians in fancy uniforms who think warfare is something you solve with the right combination of words and treaties. He turned to face her fully, his black eyes reflecting depths she couldn't fathom. The real reason your species is here is because someone very high up in Alliance command wanted to know if humans could fight. Could fight we have been fighting for thousands of years. With each other, yes. Primitive weapons, basic tactics, limited scope. Zrak's voice carried no judgment, just statement of fact. But could you fight alongside species whose thought patterns are fundamentally alien to your own? Could you adapt to weapons and scenarios beyond your current understanding? Could you survive in a universe where humans are not the apex predator? The questions hung in the air like challenges, and Talia realized this conversation had been building since the moment she dodged Vecran's strikes. You think yesterday was a fluke, she said. I think yesterday was data. One data point does not constitute a pattern. Drac paused, studying her reaction. Human reflexes are biologically speaking inferior to most alliance species. Your strength-to-weight ratio is adequate, but unremarkable. Your sensory capabilities are limited compared to species like the Tellus or Zephyrians. Each word felt like a small, cut precise and clinical. But, Drac continued, there are aspects of human psychology that our analysts find intriguing. Your species' capacity for adaptation under stress. Your tendency to perform beyond theoretical limitations when properly motivated. Your disturbing habit of winning conflicts you should logically lose. Is there a point to this, sir? Oh, the point, Cadet Venn, is that you represent more than just yourself in this facility. Whether you asked for it or not, you are a test case. The success or failure of human integration into Alliance forces may well depend on how you perform here. The weight of that revelation settled on her shoulders like lead armor. No pressure at all. Now, Drac set his tone, shifting to something more immediate. Let's see if yesterday's performance was skill or luck. They returned to the main training floor where the other cadets had already formed into groups. But instead of the standard team exercises, Drac called for individual assessments. One by one, cadets faced off against the simulator's combat algorithms, their performances measured and recorded. When Talia's turn came, she stepped into the simulation chamber expecting another reflex test. Instead, the environment shifted to something that looked like an urban combat zone. Buildings rose around her, their surfaces scarred by weapons fire. The air tasted of smoke and ozone. Scenario urban pacification. Drac's voice echoed from speakers. Hostile contacts unknown. Civilian safety priority. Weapons free. The first attack came from above. Energy bolts that seared the body air where she'd been standing a split second before. Talia rolled behind, cover her mind, automatically cataloging angles, distances, potential threats. This wasn't a reflex test anymore. This was actual combat tactics. A second shooter opened fire from her left, forcing her to move. Then a third from the right. The simulator was boxing her in, testing not just her speed, but her ability to think under pressure. But as the scenario intensified, something interesting happened. Instead of panicking, instead of falling back on brute force solutions, Talia found herself thinking 3 moves ahead, using the environment, turning the simulator's own aggression against it. When the session ended 12 minutes later, the urban landscape was quiet except for the simulated sounds of distant sirens. Impressive, Drac said as she exited the chamber, but there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before, something that might have been concern. Your tactical awareness is considerably above standard for a first-year cadet. Thank you, sir. That wasn't necessarily a compliment. He moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Tell me, Cadet Venn, where did you learn those movement patterns? Talia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the simulation chamber's cooling systems. Movement patterns, sir. The way you use concealment, the timing of your advances. Those aren't academy techniques. His black eyes bored into hers. Those are battlefield adaptations, combat-tested methods. For a moment, she considered lying, giving him some sanitized version of her background that wouldn't raise uncomfortable questions. But something about Drac's directness demanded honesty in return. Detroit ruins, sir. Urban conflict zone for most of my childhood. You learn to move, or you don't survive to grow up. Combat experience. It wasn't a question. Real combat experience. Against human opponents using human weapons. Yes, sir. Drac was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Around them, other cadets continued their simulations, oblivious to the conversation that was quietly redefining everything they thought they knew about the human in their midst. You've killed before, he said finally. Yes, sir. Multiple times. Sir, if this is going to be a problem. On the contrary, Cadet Venn, it explains a great deal. Drac's secondary arms moved to his equipment belt, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as nervous energy. Most of these cadets have trained extensively but never faced actual life or death scenarios. They know theory. You know reality. He turned to address the entire training floor. All cadets attention, scenario modification. Cadet Venn will now demonstrate advanced urban tactics for the benefit of the class. Observer positions, please. As the other cadets gathered around the simulation chamber's viewing area, Talia felt that familiar sensation of being on display. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't being examined as a curiosity or a potential failure. She was being studied as a weapon. And in the crowd of watching faces, she caught sight of Tharnjalek, his biomechanical enhancements gleaming as he leaned forward with intense interest. The expression on his wolf-like features wasn't hostility anymore. It was recognition. The look one predator gives another when they suddenly realize they might not be the apex hunter in the room after all. The demonstration went flawlessly. Every movement precise, every decision calculated, every outcome exactly what Drac had hoped for. When it ended, the viewing area was completely silent. Questions, Drac asked the assembled cadets. No one spoke. Excellent. Dismissed. As the cadets filed out, Talia caught Tharn's eye one more time. This time his expression had shifted again, from recognition to something else entirely. Something that looked an awful lot like hunger, and she realized that her problems weren't ending. They were just getting started. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Talia was running maintenance checks on her gear in the equipment bay when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate, with the slight mechanical whir that meant bioenhancements. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. We need to talk, Tharn's voice rumbled in the confined space. Do we? Talia continued her equipment check, keeping her movements casual, despite every nerve ending screaming alerts. In a space this small, if Tharn decided to get physical, she'd have maybe 2 seconds to react before 8 feet of augmented predator turned her into paste. You're not what they told us humans were like. Maybe they didn't know what to tell you. Talia finally turned, keeping her back to the equipment lockers. Not ideal positioning, but better than giving him her back entirely. Or maybe you didn't ask the right questions. Tharn studied her with those enhanced eyes, and she could actually hear the soft hum of his ocular implants adjusting focus. In my culture, we have a concept called zekarthet. It means hidden blade, something that appears harmless until the moment it cuts you. Charming. Is there a point to this philosophical discussion? The point, Tharn said, stepping closer, is that I've been thinking about your little performance yesterday, and again today, and I've realized something interesting. Talia waited, her hands seemingly relaxed at her sides, but positioned for quick movement if needed. Commander Drac has been at this academy for 15 years. In all that time, no cadet has ever truly surprised him. Oh, some have impressed him with dedication or skill, but surprise, actual genuine surprise. Tharn's biomechanical jaw made soft clicking sounds as he spoke. That hasn't happened since I've been here. Lucky me. Lucky you indeed. Because it made me reconsider some assumptions I'd made about our esteemed commander's limitations. The way he said it made Talia's blood run cold, because suddenly she understood what this was really about. This wasn't about her at all. This was about Tharn seeing an opportunity in her success, a weakness he could exploit. You're thinking about challenging him again, she said. Tharn's smile was all teeth and malice. I'm thinking about a lot of things. But first I want to understand exactly what kind of weapon the Alliance has accidentally imported from Earth. Before Talia could respond, the equipment bay's main door slid open with a soft hiss. Commander Drac stood in the entrance, his 6 arms perfectly still, taking in the scene with those predatory eyes. Cadet Jalek, Cadet Venn. His voice was carefully neutral. Am I interrupting something? Just getting to know our human colleague better, Tharn replied, not moving away from Talia. Learning about Earth customs. How educational. Cadet Venn, you're needed in my office, now. It wasn't a request, and Talia didn't treat it like one. She gathered her gear and moved toward the door, feeling Tharn's eyes tracking her every step. See you around, Zaka Earth, he called after her, and the nickname sounded like a promise and a threat wrapped in the same package. Drac's office was spartanly furnished, but filled with weapons from a dozen different worlds. Trophies, Talia realized. Mementos from conflicts she couldn't even imagine. The commander gestured for her to sit, but remained standing, himself, his multiple arms moving restlessly. That was poorly handled, he said without preamble. Sir, Cadet Jalek, you allowed him to corner you in a confined space. You gave him physical and psychological advantages. In a real conflict, you'd be dead. Talia felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was just a conversation, sir. Well, yeah, was it? Jrak moved to his desk, picking up a data pad with his secondary arms, while his primary ones remained focused on her. Cadet Jalek has been at this academy longer than most. He's studied every instructor, every technique, every weakness in our training protocols. He's particularly studied me because of your previous encounter, because of his humiliation. Jrak's voice carried undertones that suggested this was personal territory. Tharn Jalek comes from a warrior culture where honor is measured in combat victories. When I defeated him last year, I didn't just win a training exercise. I challenged his fundamental sense of self-worth. The pieces were starting to fit together in ways Talia really didn't like. And he sees me as what exactly a way to get back at you? Possibly. Or a weapon he can use to prove that my methods are flawed. Or simply a new challenge to overcome. Jrak set down the datapad and faced her fully. What concerns me more is that you don't seem to understand the implications of your own capabilities. Sir, tell me about your training on Earth. The real training, not whatever sanitized version made it into your academy application. Talia hesitated. This conversation was veering into territory she'd hoped to avoid. But Jrak's black eyes were patient and implacable, and she realized he wasn't going to let this go. Detroit was a war zone for 12 years, she said finally. Not officially, of course. Officially, it was civil unrest and economic displacement. But when you're 10 years old and someone's shooting at you because you're in the wrong sector, the politics don't matter much. Go on. My brother Marcus was military, special operations. When he came home on leave, She paused, choosing her words carefully. He taught me things. How to move without being seen. How to read terrain and people. How to fight when fighting was the only option left. Multiple martial arts disciplines. Silat primarily, but also Krav Maga, Aikido, whatever worked. Talia's hands moved unconsciously as she spoke muscle memory from years of practice. Marcus said that in a real fight style doesn't matter. Only results matter. And how many real fights did you survive? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Because that's what her childhood had been really. A series of small funerals for the parts of herself that had to die so the rest could live. Enough, she said finally. Jrak nodded slowly as if she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. Cadet Venn, I'm going to tell you something that's not in any official manual. The Alliance has been at peace for nearly a century. Most of our member species have evolved beyond the need for individual combat skills. We train here not because we expect war, but because readiness prevents war. That's good, sir. It is. But it also means that most of these cadets, for all their genetic advantages and technological enhancements, have never faced a truly desperate opponent. They've never fought someone who learned combat as a matter of survival rather than sport. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. You're saying I have an advantage. I'm saying you have something that can't be taught in any economy. You have the willingness to do whatever it takes to survive. And that Cadet Venn is both an asset and a danger. Before she could ask what he meant when that, an alert chimed on his desk display. Jrak's expression shifted from thoughtful to grim as he read the message. It seems Cadet Jalek has just submitted a formal request for a demonstration match. Combat applications of recently learned techniques. Jrak's secondary arms moved to the weapons on his wall, touching them like old friends. He's citing Academy regulations about the educational value of interspecies tactical exchange. A formal challenge? Effectively, yes. And according to Academy protocols, I'm required to honor such requests unless there's clear evidence of malicious intent. He turned back to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Commander Jrak looked genuinely concerned. The question is, Cadet Venn, what are you going to do about it? What do you mean, sir? I mean that Tharn Jalek just used Academy regulations to force you into exactly the kind of confrontation he's been planning. He's studied you now. He knows your approximate capabilities. He's chosen the time, the terms, and the context. Jrak's voice carried the weight of experience and regret. Unless you're prepared to refuse and accept the academic and social consequences, you're going to fight him. The only question is whether you're going to fight him smart. Talia felt something cold and familiar settle in her stomach. The same feeling she'd had in those Detroit alleyways when she realized that talking wasn't going to solve the problem and running wasn't going to be an option. When, she asked? Tomorrow, 1800 hours, full academy observation as per regulations. Drac paused, studying her reaction. Unless you'd prefer to decline. Talia thought about Tharn's smile in the equipment bay, about the hunger in his eyes when he'd watched her demonstration, about the way he'd called her Zikarath like he was naming something he planned to collect. No, sir, she said quietly. I don't think declining is really an option anymore. No, Drac agreed. I don't think it ever was. And in the silence that followed, Talia could almost hear the sound of wheels turning, of pieces falling into place of a game much larger than she'd imagined, finally revealing its true scope. Tomorrow she was going to find out just how much her survival skills were really worth. News traveled fast in a closed environment like the Academy. By the time Talia made it back to her quarters, half the station already knew about the formal challenge. Cadets who'd barely acknowledged her existence before were suddenly finding reasons to walk past her door. Some looked curious, others excited, and a few carried expressions that suggested they were already placing bets on the outcome. Nemu was waiting in their shared common area, her delicate features creased with worry. As a Tellus, she could feel the emotional turbulence radiating from every corner of the academy, and it was clearly taking its toll. The entire station is buzzing, she said without preamble. Fear, excitement, anticipation, bloodlust. It's like someone threw a stone into a perfectly calm pond. Sorry about that, Talia said, sinking into a chair that adjusted automatically to her human physiology. Wasn't exactly my plan to become the entertainment committee. This isn't entertainment. Nemu's voice carried undertones that made Talia look up sharply. I've been listening to the emotional currents all afternoon. There are cadets here who see this as more than just a training exercise. What do you mean, political implications? Species rivalry, questions about alliance integration policies. Naimu moved closer, her starlight eyes reflecting depths of concern. Talia, some of these beings see your success or failure tomorrow as a referendum on whether humans belong here at all. The weight of that statement settled on Talia's shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd known she was representing more than herself, but the scope of what that meant was becoming clearer by the hour. No pressure, right? There's more. Naimu hesitated, clearly struggling with something. I've been picking up emotional signatures from the command staff. Fear, but not the kind you'd expect from concern about cadet safety. And what kind then? The kind that comes from realizing you might have miscalculated something important. Before Talia could ask what that meant, their door chime announced a visitor. The holographic display showed a figure she didn't recognize. Another Vroxy, but smaller than Tharn, with fewer biomechanical enhancements and eyes that held intelligence rather than hunger. I don't know him, Talia said. I do. Nemu's voice was carefully neutral. That's Kranik Jalek, Tharn's younger brother. Talia felt her stomach drop. This can't be good. When she opened the door, Kranik stood with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the universe. But unlike his brother, there was no aggression in his posture, no sense of barely contained violence. Cadet Venn, I apologize for the intrusion. Might I have a word? His English was precise, formal, with only the slightest accent to mark it as a second language. Talia gestured him inside, noting how Naimu immediately retreated to give them space while remaining within hearing range. Your brother and I have a situation, Talia said without preamble. I'm assuming that's why you're here. Perceptive. Yes, my brother's challenge is why I've come. Kranik settled into a chair with fluid grace, his biomechanical joints moving silent to wisdom. But perhaps not for the reasons you think. Enlighten me. Tharn is my elder brother, and I love him. But he's also driven by demons that have nothing to do with you or your capabilities. Kranik's eyes held genuine pain. The defeat he suffered at Commander Zrak's hands last year. It broke something in him. Something that was perhaps already fragile. Talia waited, sensing there was more. On our homeworld, Tharn was what you might call a prodigy, the youngest Vroxy in 3 generations to achieve warrior status. The first of our clan to qualify for off-world military service. Kranik's voice carried the weight of family history. He came here expecting to continue that pattern of dominance. When Zrak defeated him so thoroughly, so publicly, it challenged everything he believed about himself. And now he sees me as what a way to prove Drak isn't invincible. Partly, but it's more complex than that. Krenak leaned forward, his expression intensely serious. You represent something my brother can't categorize. Humans weren't supposed to be formidable opponents. Your species' reputation suggested you were clever, but weak, innovative, but physically limited. Yet you've demonstrated capabilities that don't match those expectations. So, so Tharn has convinced himself that if he can defeat you decisively, it will prove that human capabilities are overrated, and by extension that Drak's defeat of him was less significant than it appeared. Talia felt pieces clicking together in her mind. He's fighting his own insecurities through me. Precisely. Which makes him far more dangerous than if this were simply about martial prowess. Krenok's voice carried genuine warning. A warrior fighting for honor is predictable. A warrior fighting to salvage his self-worth will do anything to win. The implications of that statement hung in the air like smoke. Talia had faced desperate opponents before back in Detroit. They were always the most dangerous because they had nothing left to lose. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow's challenge isn't just about you and Tharn, it's become a symbol for something much larger. Krenok stood, moving toward the door. The Academy is watching to see how humans perform under extreme pressure. The Alliance military is evaluating whether your species can handle integration into their command structure. And my brother is carrying the weight of his own failures into a fight where failure isn't an option. You think he'll cheat? I think he'll do whatever it takes to win. And the Academy regulations that govern formal challenges have gaps that someone sufficiently motivated could exploit. As he reached the door, Krenok turned back one last time. There's something else you should know. Tharn has been studying recordings of your previous performances, frame-by-frame analysis, movement patterns, reaction times, tactical preferences. His eyes held genuine respect mixed with concern. He's not approaching this as a simple contest of strength or speed. He's treating it like a military operation. Yes, complete with intelligence gathering, tactical planning, and contingency scenarios. Krenok paused. I thought you deserved to know what you are really facing tomorrow. After he left, Talia sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything she'd learned. Nimu eventually moved closer, her empathic abilities apparently picking up the shift in Talia's emotional state. You're scared, the Tellus observed. No, Talia corrected. I'm angry. Angry. I came here to prove humans could contribute to something larger than ourselves, to honor my brother's belief that we could be better than what we were. Talia's hands clenched into fists. Instead, I've been turned into a symbol in someone else's psychological drama. What are you going to do? Talia stood, moving to the small viewport that looked out into the star-scattered void. Somewhere in that darkness was the Earth, the world she'd left behind, in hopes of finding something worth fighting for. Somewhere else was whatever future awaited humanity among the stars. I'm going to do what my brother taught me, she said finally. I'm going to survive. And I'm going to make sure that when this is over, everyone understands exactly what humans are capable of. Even if it means hurting Tharn. Especially if it means hurting Tharn. Talia's reflection in the viewport looked back at her with eyes that had seen too much death to flinch from the prospect of more. Because he's not the only one who's been studying Nimu. I've been watching him too, and I've figured out something important. What's that? He's spent so much time preparing to fight a human that he's forgotten something crucial about what makes us dangerous. Talia's smile was sharp as broken glass. We don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to win. Outside their viewport, the stars burned cold and distant witnesses to countless conflicts across the galaxy. Tomorrow they'd witness one more. And when it was over, the Academy would understand that humanity's place among the stars wasn't going to be determined by anyone's expectations. It was going to be taken by force. 1,800 hours approached like an execution. Talia spent the morning in meditation, running through the mental exercises Marcus had taught her during those long Detroit nights. Not the physical training that was already locked into muscle memory. This was about finding the calm center that existed beneath fear, beneath anger, beneath the crushing weight of expectation. The Academy's main combat arena had been reconfigured for formal challenges. What was normally a flexible training space had become something that looked like a gladiatorial coliseum, complete with tiered seating for observers and holographic displays that would capture every angle of the confrontation. By the time Talia arrived, the arena was packed. She'd expected the cadets, of course. What she hadn't expected was the delegation of senior officers from Alliance Command, their dress uniforms glittering with rank insignia and decorations from conflicts she'd only read about in history texts. This wasn't just academy entertainment anymore. This was a formal evaluation. Commander Zrak met her at the equipment staging area, his 6 arms moving through a final systems check of the arena's safety protocols. "Second thoughts?" he asked without looking up from his displays. "About fighting, no." Talia adjusted the straps on her training gear, making sure everything was secure but not restrictive. "About what comes after, maybe." After is something you worry about when you survive during. Zrak finally turned to face her, and she could see something in his black eyes that might have been respect. "You've studied him as much as I can. Vroxy physiology, typical fighting patterns, biomechanical enhancement specifications." Talia paused, considering. But Cranach was right. This isn't really about combat techniques anymore. No, it's about proving that strength comes in forms that can't be easily measured or categorized. Zrak's voice carried undertones she couldn't quite read. "Are you prepared for what that might require?" Before she could ask what he meant, the arena's announcement system crackled to life. "Formal challenge commencing in 10 minutes. Participants, 2 positions." Across the arena, Talia could see Tharn moving through his own preparations. The difference was striking. Where she moved with economical precision, he moved with theatrical flair. Every gesture calculated for maximum psychological impact. His biomechanical enhancements gleamed under the arena lighting, and she could see additional modifications that hadn't been there during their previous encounters. "He's upgraded his hardware," she observed. "Within Academy regulations," Zrak confirmed. "Barely. The Combat Ethics Board approved his request this morning." Of course they did. The arena filled with the low murmur of hundreds of conversations as beings from across the galaxy settled into their seats. Talia could see Naimu in the cadet section, her delicate features tight with concern. Near the command observation deck, she spotted several humans in Alliance uniforms, other members of her species who'd achieved positions within the military hierarchy. Their presence added another layer of pressure she really didn't need. Participants center ring. Talia walked to the marked position, feeling the weight of all those eyes tracking her movement. The arena's acoustics meant she could hear fragments of whispered conversations in a dozen different languages, but her universal translator was picking up enough to get the general sentiment. Most of them expected her to lose. Tharn approached from the opposite side, and up close, the extent of his modifications was even more impressive. His natural Vroxy musculature had been augmented with servo-assisted joints that would triple his striking power. His reaction speed enhancers were military-grade, designed for battlefield conditions rather than training exercises. Most concerning of all, his defensive plating looked like it could stop small arms fire. "Impressive hardware," Talia said as they faced each other in the center of the ring. "Vroxy engineering at its finest." Tharn's voice carried through external speakers, now the biomechanical modifications having apparently replaced his natural vocal cords. "I hope you appreciate the effort I've put into preparing for this encounter. I'm touched by your dedication." "You should be. I've studied every second of your previous performances, every movement pattern, every tactical decision, every physiological limitation." His enhanced eyes whirred softly as they focused on her. "I know exactly how you fight human." "Do you?" Something in her tone made his smile falter slightly, but before he could respond, the officiating instructor stepped between them. "Combat challenge parameters. Full contact submission or incapacitation determines victor. Medical intervention at referee discretion. Academy combat regulations in effect with formal challenge modifications." The instructor's voice carried to every corner of the arena. "Participants acknowledge understanding." "Acknowledged," Tharn said immediately. Talia took a moment longer, using the time to center herself one final time. In the sudden quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat steady and strong. She could feel the arena's recycled air moving across her skin. She could sense the weight of expectation pressing down like a physical force. And underneath it all, she could hear Marcus's voice from a Detroit alleyway years ago. When they think they know everything about you, that's when you show them something new. Acknowledged, she said finally. The instructor retreated to the referee position. Around the arena, conversations died as hundreds of beings leaned forward in anticipation. Combat positions. Talia dropped into a stance that looked deceptively casual. Weight balanced, hands loose, ready to move in any direction. Across from her, Tharn assumed a classical Vroxy attack formation, his enhanced limbs locked into position for maximum power generation. You know what the difference is between us, Tharn called across the ring, his amplified voice carrying clearly to the observers. Enlighten me. I fight for honor, for pride, for the respect of my peers. His biomechanical systems hummed as they powered up to full readiness. You fight for survival, and survival is just another word for fear. Talia smiled, and for the first time since this whole situation began, it was completely genuine. You're absolutely right, she said. I do fight for survival, but you've made one crucial mistake in your analysis. What's that? You assume I'm afraid of you. The silence that followed was so complete that Talia could hear the soft whir of recording equipment in the observation deck. Begin! Tharn launched himself forward with augmented speed, his enhanced musculature propelling him across the ring like a guided missile. His attack was perfectly executed, textbook Vroxy combat doctrine, adapted for his biomechanical advantages. It would have been devastating against any opponent who fought the way he expected them to. But Talia wasn't there anymore. She'd moved at the exact moment the referee gave the signal not away from Tharn's charge, but to the side, and in slightly forward positioning herself in the one place his tactical analysis hadn't accounted for. As 8 feet of enhanced predator swept past her, she did something so simple and so unexpected that the arena fell into stunned silence. She laughed. Not with hysteria or fear, but with genuine amusement. The sound of someone who just realized that all their worrying had been for nothing. Because Tharn Jalek, for all his enhancements and preparations in psychological analysis, had forgotten the most important lesson about fighting humans. They didn't just adapt to survive, they adapted to win. And Talia Venn was about to show everyone exactly what that meant. The first exchange lasted exactly 12 seconds. Tharn, thrown off balance by his mischarge, spun with enhanced reflexes to face her. His tactical software was already recalculating, adjusting for her unexpected movement pattern. But as he brought his augmented limbs to bear, Talia was already moving again. Not the careful defensive movements the observers expected. Not the desperate scrambling of someone outmatched. This was something else entirely. Something that looked almost like she was dancing. She flowed around to his second attack with liquid grace, staying just outside the range of his enhanced reach. When he tried to corner her against the arena wall, she used the barrier itself as a launching point, vaulting over his head in a move that would have been impossible for most species, but was basic parkour for someone who'd grown up in Detroit's vertical slums. Stand still and fight, Tharn snarled, his amplified voice echoing off the arena walls. Why? Talia called back, landing softly behind him. You're doing fine fighting shadows. The comment drew nervous laughter from some of the observers, but Talia could see the effect it had on Tharn. His biomechanical systems were running hot now, steam venting from cooling ports as his enhanced muscles worked beyond their optimal parameters. He was getting frustrated, and frustrated opponents made mistakes. The third exchange was where everything changed. Tharn, abandoning tactical precision for raw aggression, launched a combination that should have ended the fight. His enhanced speed created a blur of motion that his biomechanical limbs could barely track. Any normal opponent would have been overwhelmed. But Talia had stopped thinking of herself as a normal opponent the moment she'd heard Tharn's laugh in the equipment bay. Instead of trying to match his speed, she did something that violated every principle of conventional combat doctrine. She moved slower, not sluggishly, not clumsily, but with deliberate economical precision that made every one of his enhanced strikes miss by margins so small they looked accidental. To the observers, it appeared that Tharn was overwhelming her through sheer power. To anyone who understood combat at a deeper level, it was clear that she was controlling the entire exchange. Impossible, Isheo, she heard someone whisper from the observation deck. But Marcus had taught her this lesson during those long nights in Detroit. Speed isn't about how fast you move, he had said. It's about being where you need to be when you need to be there. Let them exhaust themselves chasing shadows. Tharn's enhanced systems were pushing into the red zone now. The arena's sensors were picking up heat signatures that suggested his biomechanical components were operating beyond safe parameters. But he couldn't stop. His pride, his reputation, his entire sense of self-worth was tied up in this moment, which was exactly what Talia had been counting on. The opening came in the fourth exchange, so subtle that most observers missed it entirely. Tharn, his systems overheating and his movements becoming fractionally less precise, committed just a little too heavily to a strike that should have taken her head off. Talia stepped inside his guard close enough that she could smell the ozone from his overloaded circuitry. For a split second, they were face to face close enough that his enhanced sensors could read the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. "You want to know the real difference between us?" she said quietly, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "What?" he growled, trying to bring his secondary arms to bear at point-blank range. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone." Then she moved, not with enhanced speed or augmented strength, not with exotic martial arts or advanced technology. She moved with something that couldn't be taught in any academy and couldn't be purchased with any amount of biomechanical enhancement. She moved with the absolute certainty of someone who had faced death so many times that it had become just another opponent to outmaneuver. The technique was basic Aikido, something Marcus had shown her when she was 14 and angry at the world. Use the opponent's strength against them, redirect their force into something they couldn't control, turn their advantage into their weakness. Tharn's enhanced momentum, designed to make him unstoppable, became the very thing that brought him down. Talia's grip on his primary arm, combined with a pivot that used his own mass against him, sent 8 feet of augmented predator crashing into the arena floor with a sound like a small building collapsing. The silence that followed was absolute. Tharn lay motionless, his biomechanical systems sparking fitfully as emergency shutdowns kicked in. Steam rose from his overheated components, creating an almost ethereal mist around his fallen form. Talia stood over him, barely breathing hard, her training gear unmarked by the encounter. "Medical assistance to the arena floor." Commander Zrak's voice cut through the silence with professional calm. As the medical team moved in to assess Tharn's condition, Talia became aware of the sound that was slowly building around her. Not cheering, not celebration, something else entirely. It was the sound of hundreds of beings across dozens of species slowly realizing that everything they thought they knew about humans might need to be reconsidered. The medical report came back 20 minutes later. No permanent damage, but Tharn's biomechanical systems would need extensive recalibration before he could return to active training. His pride, on the other hand, might take considerably longer to repair. Talia found herself in the Academy's main briefing room, facing a panel that included Commander Zrak, Admiral Kess from Alliance Command, and 3 other senior officers whose species she couldn't immediately identify. The room's walls displayed tactical analyses of the fight, frame-by-frame breakdowns that revealed details even she hadn't been conscious of during the actual combat. "Remarkable," Admiral Kess said, her crystalline Zephyrian features shifting colors as she processed the data. "Your opponent possessed every conceivable advantage: enhanced speed, augmented strength, military-grade defensive systems, yet the engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. Sometimes advantages become disadvantages," Talia replied carefully, "especially when they make you overconfident." "Is that what happened here, overconfidence?" Talia considered the question, thinking about Tharn's hunger for vindication, his need to prove himself through her defeat. He was fighting for the wrong reasons. That made him predictable. "And what were you fighting for?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Talia realized this was the real test. Not the physical confrontation with Tharn, but this moment, this evaluation of her motivations and her understanding of what had just occurred. "I was fighting to survive," she said finally, "but not just physically. I was fighting for the right to be here to prove that humans can contribute something valuable to the Alliance. I was fighting for everyone back on Earth who dreams of being part of something larger than themselves." Admiral Kess exchanged glances with the other officers before nodding slowly. "Your performance today has raised questions about our current assessment protocols, particularly regarding species integration and capability evaluation. Ma'am, put simply, Cadet Venn, your success suggests that we may have been underestimating human potential significantly." The Admiral's colors shifted again, cycling through patterns that Talia's universal translator identified as deep contemplation, which leads to the question of what we do with that information. Commander Jrak leaned forward. The Academy Board has asked me to make an offer, Cadet Venn, advanced placement in our tactical instruction program. You would train directly with senior combat instructors while helping to develop new integration protocols for human cadets. You want me to train others. We want you to help us understand what makes humans effective in ways our standard metrics don't capture. Jrak's six arms moved in patterns that suggested deep respect. Today's demonstration suggests there are aspects of human psychology and physiology that we haven't properly accounted for in our training programs. Talia thought about the conversation she'd had with Nimue about the emotional currents running through the academy, about the way the other cadets had looked at her after the fight, not with hostility anymore, but with something that might eventually become respect. What about Tharn Maneum? Cadet Jalek will recover, and perhaps learn something valuable about the difference between strength and effectiveness. Admiral Kess's tone suggested that Tharn's future at the academy would depend largely on how well he'd processed that lesson. His brother has requested permission to speak with you incidentally. Kranakko, he wanted to thank you. Apparently, he believes this experience may help his brother overcome some long-standing personal issues. The Admiral paused. He also mentioned something about humans having a saying, about how getting knocked down isn't failure, but staying down is. Talia almost smiled at that. Marcus had indeed taught her that particular lesson, usually while helping her up after some particularly brutal training session. I accept the offer, she said, on one condition, which is I want to help design training programs that give other species the same opportunities to surprise us. Today proved that our assumptions about capability and potential can be wrong in both directions. Admiral Kess's colors cycled through what the translator identified as approval and anticipation. An interesting perspective, and one that suggests human integration into Alliance forces may proceed more smoothly than some of our projections indicated. As the meeting concluded and Talia made her way back to her quarters, she passed through the Academy's main concourse. Conversations died as she walked by, but not with the hostile curiosity of before. This was different. This was the attention given to someone who had proven themselves in a way that transcended species boundaries. Naimu was waiting for her along with several other cadets she'd barely spoken to before. A Kareth whose tentacles moved in patterns that suggested deep respect. A Zephyrian whose crystalline features cycled through colors of admiration. Even a young Vroxy who bore a strong family resemblance to both Tharn and Krenak. So, Nimue said with a smile that lit up her delicate features, I take it the meeting went well? Well enough. Talia settled into a chair, feeling truly relaxed for the first time since arriving at the academy. Turns out beating up enhanced predators is a good way to get people's attention. You did more than get their attention, the young Vroxy said, his voice carrying accents of awe. You changed how they think about strength itself. Maybe? Talia looked around at the group that had gathered beings from across the galaxy who had chosen to see her not as a curiosity or a threat, but as a colleague. But the real test isn't winning one fight. It's what we do with the victory afterward. What do you mean? The Kareth asked, his tentacles weaving patterns of curiosity. I mean that proving humans belong here was just the beginning. Now we have to prove we deserve to stay. Talia's voice carried undertones of determination that made even the veteran cadets lean forward. And that means being worthy of the trust they're placing in us. Outside the Academy's viewports, the stars burned with the same cold fire they'd carried for billions of years. But something had changed in the space between those distant lights. A small shift in the balance of things, a crack in the certainty that some species were simply superior to others. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes a beginning was all you needed to change everything. 3 months later, Talia stood in the same combat arena where she'd faced Tharn Jalek, but everything had changed. The space was filled with cadets from 17 different species, all of them focused intently as she demonstrated a technique that had nothing to do with enhanced reflexes or biomechanical augmentation. Instead, she was teaching them something far more valuable: how to think like a survivor. Combat isn't about being the strongest or the fastest, she said, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the arena. It's about being the most adaptable, the most willing to do what's necessary when everything else falls apart. In the observation deck, she could see familiar faces. Commander Jrak, his 6 arms crossed, in what she'd learned was his version of approval. Admiral Kess, her crystalline features cycling through colors of satisfaction. And near the back, partially hidden in shadow, Tharnjalek himself. The former Academy Terror had returned to active training 2 weeks ago. His biomechanical systems recalibrated and his attitude significantly adjusted. He no longer moved with the arrogant certainty of someone who believed himself naturally superior. Instead, he carried himself with the careful humility of someone who had learned that strength came in forms he'd never imagined. Their first conversation after his return had been brief but illuminating. "I owe you an apology," he'd said, his enhanced voice modulated to something approaching genuine contrition. "No," Talia had replied. "You owe yourself the chance to be better than what you were." He'd nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like electricity. "My brother says humans have a saying about falling down. Getting knocked down isn't failing. Staying down is." "Yes, I've been thinking about that." Tharn had paused, his biomechanical eyes focusing on something distant. "I stayed down for a year after my defeat, too proud to admit I'd learned something valuable, too angry to grow from the experience. And now I think I'd like to learn what you're teaching the others, if you'll have me." She'd accepted, of course, because that was what humans did. They adapted, they found ways to turn former enemies into allies. It was perhaps their greatest strength, and one the Alliance was only beginning to understand. Now, watching Tharn practice the movement patterns she'd taught him alongside cadets from species across the galaxy, Talia felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Earth: hope. Not the desperate hope of someone trying to survive another day, but the profound hope of someone who had found their place in something larger than themselves. "Cadet Venn," came a voice from behind her. She turned to find Naimu approaching her, delicate features bright with excitement. "What is it?" "Message from Earth. The first wave of human cadets has been selected for Academy admission." Naimu's starlight eyes sparkled with anticipation. 50 candidates from across your homeworld. They'll arrive next month." Talia felt a complex mix of emotions at that news. Pride, certainly, anticipation, but also a deep sense of responsibility that went beyond anything she'd felt before. "They'll need guidance," she said finally. "Yes, and they'll have it." Naimu gestured toward the training floor where beings from across the known galaxy were learning to fight not as separate species competing for dominance, but as unified forces working toward common goals. "Look what you've built here." Talia did look, and what she saw was remarkable, not just because of the tactical innovations or the improved integration protocols, but because of something more fundamental. She saw the future. A future where strength wasn't measured by biomechanical enhancements or genetic advantages, but by the willingness to stand together when everything fell apart. Where survival wasn't about individual superiority, but about collective adaptation. Where humans weren't the weakest link in an alliance of species, but partners in something greater than any single world could achieve alone. "You know what the best part is?" Naimu asked quietly. "What's that?" 3 months ago, most of these cadets believed that power meant domination, that strength meant the ability to defeat others. The Tellus moved closer, her empathic abilities apparently picking up the profound satisfaction radiating from every corner of the arena. Now they understand that real strength means the ability to lift others up. Talia nodded, watching as a Kyreth cadet helped a struggling Zephyrian with a particularly complex movement pattern. Near them, Tharn was patiently explaining tactical theory to a group of younger cadets, his enhanced voice carrying none of the arrogance that had once defined him. "My brother would have loved this," she said finally. "He'd be proud of what you've accomplished." "Maybe, but I think he'd be more proud of what we're all accomplishing together." Talia gestured toward the training floor where the future of interspecies cooperation was being written one technique at a time. "He always said that humans weren't meant to stand alone, that our real strength came from our ability to find family among strangers." "And have you found family here?" Oh, Talia looked around at the faces that had become familiar over the past months. Naimu with her gentle wisdom and unwavering support. Commander Jrak, whose respect had been earned through trial by fire. Even Tharn, whose journey from enemy to ally had shown her that redemption was always possible. Yes, she said simply. I think I have. The training session was winding down now, cadets from across the galaxy sharing techniques and stories as they prepared to return to their quarters. But the bonds being forged here would extend far beyond the academy walls. When these beings graduated and took their places in alliance forces across the known galaxy, they would carry with them something unprecedented in galactic history. They would carry the understanding that strength came not from superiority, but from unity. That survival wasn't about defeating others, but about ensuring that everyone had the chance to thrive. It wasn't the future anyone had planned for when the first human ships had ventured beyond Earth's solar system, but perhaps it was the future humanity had been meant to find all along. As Talia walked through the corridors of the academy that had become her home, she passed viewport after viewport, showing the vast emptiness between the stars. Once that darkness had seemed intimidating, filled with unknown threats and impossible challenges. Now it looked like possibility. Somewhere in that darkness, 50 humans were preparing to join her at the academy. Somewhere else, alliance forces trained with new protocols that emphasized adaptation over domination. Across the galaxy, beings who had never questioned their assumptions about strength and weakness were beginning to understand that the universe was far more complex and wonderful than they had ever imagined. And at the center of it all, a girl from the Detroit ruins who had learned to survive in the harshest conditions imaginable was now teaching others that survival wasn't the end goal. Thriving was. Sometimes all it takes to change a system is one unexpected challenger. One fight, one win. But more often than not, it takes something even more powerful than victory. It takes the wisdom to know what to do with that victory once you've earned it, and the courage to use it not for domination but for transformation. The stars burned cold and distant witnesses to the endless dance of civilizations across the cosmic stage. But tonight they were witnessing something new, something that had never existed before in the long history of galactic civilization. They were witnessing the birth of true unity among the stars. And it had all started with a human girl who refused to break when everyone expected her to fall. If this story resonated with you, if you found yourself rooting for Talia and believing in the power of human resilience, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think makes humanity special in a universe full of advanced civilizations? Have you ever found strength in unexpected places, or discovered that your perceived weaknesses were actually hidden advantages? And if you enjoyed this journey through the stars, please consider subscribing to the channel. There are more stories waiting to be told, more adventures that explore what it means to be human in an infinite universe. Stories about courage, adaptation, and the unbreakable bonds that form when different beings choose to stand together rather than apart. The universe is vast and full of wonders we're only beginning to imagine. But the greatest wonder of all might just be the capacity we all share to grow beyond what we thought possible. Until next time, keep looking up at the stars and remembering that somewhere out there the future is waiting for us to write it.